Now, the stats around abuse and violence affecting children are just incredible. A study, remember, finding that 99% of children in South Africa had experienced or witnessed some form of violence. Well, we're nearing the end of Child Protection Week. The theme this year has been Let's Protect All Children to move South Africa forward. But are we going forward or backwards when it comes to protecting vulnerable kids? Activists have raised serious concerns about proposed changes to the law contained in the Children's Amendment Bill, which they say could actually expose children to harm. Activist and writer Robin Wolfson-Foster says the haste with which the bill has been rushed to Parliament is indecent. She joins us now. Welcome, Robin, and you got the dress code. Thank you for that. On a serious note, why do you say this has been indecently rushed?
So I think that's probably the main question that we need to answer when we're looking at this bill, because if we look at it, it is an amendment to a Children's Act, and traditionally amendments are not necessarily filled with drama. It's something that we would do to make sure that we were updating the legislation to fit in with our national childcare policy and also to fit in with strategy. So for example, we know that at SONA, the President announced that he wanted to move early childhood development into the basic education department as opposed to social development. So things like that we would expect to have been in the bill. But, however, there has been another process that took place at the same time as the bill was being developed. And that is that the Department of Social Development has had a long-term need to be able to fix the problem with foster care in this country. And we know that this is something which has been lagging in terms of the government's approach for years. And it seems that at some point during the creation of this particular bill, the Department of Social Development, under the head of Minister Shabangu, decided that they would repurpose the Children's Amendment Bill to try and fix the problem in foster care. Now, that in itself might not have been a problem if they had specifically focused the amendment around foster care, or alternatively if they had prepared a little bit ahead of time to given themselves enough time to be able to make sure that everything was in place, because they had to work towards a very stringent deadline that the courts had given them for November 2019, which we know is coming up imminently. And so what we found is that in trying to fix the bill and trying to get to the place where they were meeting the requirements of the court to fix the foster care system, they have now rushed the bill through the review process, and in so doing, they've unfortunately resolved quite quickly. And also what we've seen, and this I think is probably the biggest problem with the way that the bill has been played, is that in fact it doesn't look like it is actually going to fix the foster care problem. So all of these things have contributed to a very flawed process and a very flawed bill.
So I want to look at foster care, because you said a train crash in a sense is coming, because a lot of foster parents will lose their foster grants, in fact. But first, ironically, this has been called the adoption bill, but I know that's a repeated concern, that in a way this will make adoption very, very difficult. Can we start there? Why?
Well, I think that in terms of adoption, what we know is that in the past, adoption has been considered in the law to be a specialist practice. So we have required specialist social workers to perform adoptions, which I think is very valid, because if you think about it, it is a permanent legal change to a child's identity. So it's not something that we want to do hastily. It's something that we want to ensure is properly vetted, and that the children who are placed in adopted families are children that are in fact adoptable. So in the past, what has happened is specialist social workers have both prepared adoptive parents for adoption, and they have also prepared children to be adopted. And in order to do that, they have charged specialist fees. But now what's happened in this particular bill is that those fee clauses have been deleted. So what that means in a nutshell is that social workers can no longer charge for their adoption services, and not just social workers. What the bill has also done is it's deleted fees for all specialists who are involved in the adoption process. So if we think about it, we would have doctors who were doing a medical ahead of an adoption. We've got social workers who would perform the process. We've got the psychologist who would make sure that parents were fit to be able to adopt, which obviously are all things that we really, really want to take care of. And now none of those professionals would be allowed to charge fees for the adoption process. The implication of that is that private social workers will probably have to close immediately.
So I've heard government officials
Yes.
Talking about this issue, suggesting that NGOs, that these private officials are basically milking profits off adoption. I think that's the big underlying concern. Can you address that?
Absolutely. And I think we do not want those fees to become exorbitant. We don't want adoptive parents to be penalized because they can't pay fees. But the question has always been, is that a valid concern? And if you look at the adoption fees that have been charged up until now, in fact, they're generally on a sliding scale, so based on the income of the particular parents involved. And in some cases, they're also free. So in fact, what we know is that those fees have been very highly regulated by government in the past. And again, that's something that is completely valid. We want that. We don't want any allegations that people are being paid exorbitant amounts that starts to look like it might be trafficking, like that people are buying babies. But however, if there are people who are milking the system, then those people need to be individually penalized. What we don't want to do is to get all of our private practitioners and our practitioners who are in child protection organizations out of adoptions, because then we will lose all of our specialist skills. Plus, the other downside is that the government themselves will become entirely responsible for adoptions, which would be fine if they had capacity. But with caseloads per social worker of 100 to 300 children each, we know that actually those social workers do not have the capacities to take on very serious and technical adoption processes.
Well, this is bigger than adoption, because you say at the heart of it, the end goal of government, the Department of Social Development, is to take control of social welfare services away from NGOs and private players. So give us the consequences of that. You've laid it out for adoption. Ultimately, do we need those private players for children to be safe?
Well, I think probably the biggest problem with the Department of Social Development is that it is by its own admission under-resourced. So we don't have enough social workers in the system. And what that does is it has some very serious knock-on effects. So for example, we want social workers to be able to be present when there are immediate needs within the community. Abuse cases, neglect, when children's lives are in danger. That's where we want that to be their highest priority. But if you add to that the need for them to take care of children who are in relative safe environments with kin, and we add those children to our foster care system, then they have to take on adoptions as well, and they have all the other things that are in their caseload. What happens is the quality of care starts to diminish. And already we have at least 500 preventable abuse deaths every year that are taking place because social workers are so overburdened. So now if our end goal is for government to take over all of those services from the various different private NGOs or themselves.
Okay, so let's talk about foster care, because this bill is meant to fix the whole thing. You're saying it's a mess, it's collapsed already, and that 200,000 foster parents could lose grants come November if this is rushed through, that there will be more classified orphans for these overburdened social workers to take care of. What's going on?
So this is the essence of the problem of the bill. Because if it was meant to fix foster care in this country. Unfortunately, it seems that if you look at the legal advisors who have looked at this bill in great depth, they would say that actually it looks like it's actually going to make the problem worse. So just to give you some background about foster care, this is a problem that's been 20 years in the making. And what happened in the early 2000s, we were suffering from the AIDS pandemic. We had millions of orphans suddenly in need of care and protection. What government did was they recognized that those children were mostly in families, but often those families were very poor. So you looked at grannies who were using their pensions to be able to take care of those orphans. So what government did is they tried to alleviate poverty using the foster care system, which was always a bad idea. And the reason it was a bad idea was not because we needed to alleviate poverty, that was a good idea, but because the foster care system was designed for emergency interventions for small numbers of children. So in other words, what we need, if you enter the foster care system, is we need a social worker report, we need an investigation, we need to go to the children's court, and in the foster care system, that foster care order needs to be renewed every 2 years. So in other words, it's incredibly resource intensive. And when we looked at having almost possibly 1.4 million orphans who could enter the system, we know that actually there was no way that they could be able to be taken care of.
And you lose that foster care grant if the social workers don't come and check and say it's all okay.
Exactly.
So we're running out of time. So, I mean, if this is such a mess, what is the solution? Is there one?
Okay, so the solution is that we need to take a step back from the process, and we need to say, is this bill actually meeting the needs of children? So is it in their best interests? Is it going to help them to achieve their rights? And I think the truth behind that is that it actually isn't. And so what civil society is doing is they're inviting the government to get around the table and to, let's say, rather than going ahead with this bill as it is and sending it to Parliament and asking Parliament to fix the problems in it, let's rather get the Social Development Department to recognize that it's going to cause greater burden on everyone involved. And let's pull it, let's rework it, and let's try and get it into a place where it can actually meet the needs of all of the various people who are involved in this process.
All right, thank you for your time this evening. We'll follow the Children's Amendment Bill and see how it progresses and after those concerns raised. Thank you very much for your time. Activist and writer Robin Wolfson Foster.